It all began with a letter, not an ordinary letter, nor one handwritten in ink, but a message that a simple woman claimed to have received directly from heaven during a silent dawn, in the midst of desperate prayer. That woman, named Teresa, lived in a small village hidden among the mountains. She was known for her humility, her life of recollection, and above all, for a faith that burned in her heart like a fire that never went out. People said that sometimes she talked to herself, other times she cried for no apparent reason, and that her eyes had a strange glow whenever she left the chapel. But no one could have imagined what she claimed to have seen. According to her testimony, the Virgin Mary had shown her a vision of the future, not a distant, abstract or symbolic future. No, it was the year 2025. And what she saw was a series of public health campaigns spreading like shadows over different regions of the world. Specific places, towns with names, families with faces, and most disturbing, needles piercing the skin not only of the body but also of the soul. Teresa tried to share what she had received, first with her parish priest, then with some neighbors, finally with a Marian community abroad. But what she encountered was silence. A sharp, awkward silence, as if her message were too disturbing to be heard. "We can't spread this. It will cause confusion," she was told. Even her own family began to distance themselves, and that was when Teresa disappeared. One day, she left a small handwritten note in the chapel. "Heaven has spoken. He who has ears, let him hear." For months, no one heard from her again. However, that note, hidden among the wooden benches, was found by a young woman named Daniela, a theology student who had taken refuge in the village to find peace after a year of loss. Daniela wasn't a devotee of apparitions, nor did she easily believe in visions, but something in those words moved her. It was as if a seed had been planted inside her, and from that moment on, nothing was the same. He began to investigate. He read ancient Marian messages, from Fatima to Garabandal, from La Salette to Medjugorje, and what he discovered was disturbing. There was a pattern. In many of these revelations, Our Lady warned not only of wars or natural disasters, but also of profound manipulation disguised as help, a subtle way of intervening in God's creation, and it all began, always, with the promise of protection. Daniela found disturbing similarities between what Teresa wrote and what visionaries around the world had revealed in previous decades. Even identical phrases, as if the same heavenly voice were repeating its message over and over again, hoping someone would finally listen. The body is a temple, but also a door, and not everything that enters through that door comes from God, said one message received in 1973. Hands that approach with gentleness bear the mark of deception, said another from 1981. The most shocking thing came when Daniela found a video leaked on a closed network. A doctor, his voice distorted for security reasons, confessed that certain substances tested in vulnerable regions of the global south had a spiritual side effect. He couldn't explain it scientifically, but he spoke of changes in moral sensitivity, in the perception of good and evil, and even in the ability to pray. "I'm not a believer," he said, "but after seeing what I saw, I can't sleep anymore." Could all this be connected? Could Teresa's warning not be a simple hallucination, but part of a chain of messages that heaven had been sending for decades, and that now, in 2025, became more urgent than ever? And why, then, do so many choose to remain silent? What force is so powerful that it can silence even the voices of the soul? At this point, Daniela decided to stop secretly investigating. She started writing, recording short messages, sharing fragments of what she'd found. And with each post, more responses came in. More people saying they'd felt something too, that they'd seen something too, that they'd been warned too, that heaven hadn't stopped speaking. And yet, the majority remained asleep. They continued to believe it was all hype, just another theory. But something was about to change, because while some silenced the spiritual, others, in power, began to prepare a new global campaign. a campaign with a health name, but with hidden intentions. And here, at this crossroads between the human and the divine, the second chapter of this story opens, the moment when the real truth behind the new vaccination campaign is revealed. Is it protection or is it manipulation? The news arrived as a harmless television announcement. A new vaccination campaign will be implemented in specific areas to prevent future respiratory illnesses. On the surface, it wasn't alarming at all. The message was full of reassuring words, friendly faces, and even religious figures appearing in commercials to invite the population to participate. However, something didn't fit. The locations chosen weren't the usual ones, nor did the medical reasons seem clear. And just as Daniela read the list of the first selected cities, she felt a chill run down her spine. It was exactly what she had read in Teresa's note. The coincidences were too obvious to ignore. Not only did the place names match, but so did the times. The message from the Virgin Mary delivered to Teresa mentioned that the year 2025 would mark the beginning of a purification disguised as protection, a phrase Daniela had emphasized more than once. Was this what she meant? Trying to better understand, Daniela searched for information about the institutions behind this new campaign. What she found was a tangle of international agreements, sponsorships from little-known laboratories, and the names of foundations that had been accused on other occasions of promoting population control agendas. The Virgin had made this clear in another, lesser-known message. They will use the invisible to subdue the will. One of the points that caught his attention most was that these vaccines wouldn't be required by law, but by public pressure. Access to certain schools, health services, even food aid would be limited for those who didn't accept them. A new form of obedience based on need. It was subtle, but it was real. And those who publicly questioned them were labeled fanatics, misinformers, or enemies of progress. Daniela decided to speak with local doctors, hoping to find a dissenting voice. That's when she met Dr. Ramiro, a retired pediatrician who used to attend Mass every Sunday and had already raised suspicions in his community by refusing to vaccinate his grandchildren with certain recent formulas. He showed her confidential documents from a pilot program implemented in rural communities where non-physical side effects had been reported. Children with sudden changes in behavior, prolonged insomnia, loss of concentration, and, strangest of all, an emotional disconnection from their parents. It's as if their souls had been stolen, Ramiro said, his voice breaking. The Virgin Mary had spoken of this as well. There will be living bodies with sleeping hearts, said one of the fragments revealed to another visionary in Central America. In that message, the Virgin Mary warned that certain experiments would be disguised as health emergencies, and that many would accept them out of fear, hunger, or ignorance. Heaven would not condemn them, but would call consecrated persons to act. The most disturbing thing was discovering that in several regions of southern Mexico, Bolivia, and the Philippines, families who agreed to participate in the program were being offered cash or food. Vaccinate to survive. Where was the dignity in that? Daniela began writing a detailed article, gathering testimonies, citing prophecies, and issuing warnings respectfully but firmly. However, before she could publish it, her account was suspended without explanation. She also received warnings by email, anonymous messages urging her not to continue. One read simply, "You don't understand what's at stake." But she did understand. She understood that behind this entire campaign, there was more than a concern for public health. There was a battle for the human soul, an invisible struggle anticipated decades ago, and now visible to anyone with the courage to look beyond the fear. And yet, many would continue to trust. Many would see this campaign as a gesture of help, of progress, of modernity. Not everyone can accept that evil sometimes disguises itself as an angel, and that's why Our Lady insisted so much on discernment. Good intentions aren't enough. We must seek the truth with our hearts and with prayer. Just when Daniela felt she was alone in this search, she received an unexpected message. It was from an older woman from Colombia who had read one of her texts before the blockade. She told her she had received a very clear dream in which the Virgin Mary asked her to pray for those who alter what God designed perfectly. The dream ended with a phrase that was etched in Daniela's soul: "If you touch the blood, you touch the Spirit." This changed everything, because until that moment Daniela believed she was fighting a system, but now she understood it was a spiritual war, where the body was only the gateway. And so began the search for the deepest mystery revealed in the messages, the hidden component, that subtle mark of which the Virgin spoke, and which could not be detected by microscopes, but could be detected by hearts in prayer. When Daniela first read the list of places mentioned by Teresa in her message, she thought it was simply symbolism. She could not imagine that those specific regions, cities and communities would years later be the first targets of a global campaign disguised as a health campaign. But everything changed when a Catholic community in northern Mexico, dedicated to perpetual adoration, began reporting strange phenomena just after mobile vaccination centers were set up there. That same week, 3 people in the community suffered sudden fainting spells during adoration, and one of the priests claimed to have heard a heavenly voice saying, "Here begins the test. Here falls the first drop." This pattern was repeated elsewhere. In Arequipa, Peru, a nurse working on the pilot program publicly denounced that the instructions she had received did not match standard medical protocol. In Medellin, Colombia, a mother found sealed documents inside a box of syringes, bearing unfamiliar symbols and words that did not belong in the Spanish language. And in a village in Honduras, a nun claimed she saw a dark shadow emerge from a child's body just after receiving the injection. These testimonies began to circulate in small prayer groups, especially among those who had been following Marian revelations for years. It was then that a group of apparition scholars, including priests, consecrated laypeople, and theologians, decided to analyze the most relevant messages received since 1917. What they found was disturbing. Several ancient messages already pointed to specific places where darkness would seek to sow confusion, disguised as compassion. Fatima, Garabandal, Akita, Kibeho. In each of these apparitions, there were vague but insistent references to lands warm with innocent blood, mountains where pain will descend like a cloud, and islands where the harmony of the body will be shattered. Although at the time they seemed like symbolic phrases, they now took on new meaning. The regions mentioned coincided in many cases with the first phases of distribution of this mysterious new vaccine. And these were not just poor countries, but also areas with strong spiritual activity, as if seeking to interfere where faith was still alive. One of the most recurring locations in the messages was Central America. According to revelations received by a psychic in Nicaragua in 1987, from the center of the continent, a sign will come forth that will separate the wheat from the chaff. Now, in 2025, that phrase seemed to come to life. It was there that governments were most committed to widespread implementation, even in isolated rural areas where healthcare had previously been scarce or non-existent. Why so much sudden interest? What urgency motivated such a well-funded rollout? But the messages didn't just speak about geographical areas, they also spoke in spiritual terms. Our Lady warned that the regions with the greatest presence of the Eucharist, community prayer and Marian consecration, would be those most attacked by the enemy's invisible strategy. They don't seek to extinguish the light in the world, but rather where a glow still remains, read one of the fragments collected by a European mystic in 2001. This led Daniela to contact communities in the Philippines, Poland, and Brazil, where they also began receiving similar reports. Institutional pressure, financial rewards, media silence, and strange physical symptoms after the first doses. In all cases, The campaigns targeted areas with high religious participation, as if collective faith were a threat to something much deeper than a simple medical narrative. One of the most shocking cases was that of a village in the Amazon rainforest, where a massive power outage occurred the same night a group of missionaries refused to allow vaccinations in their schools. That night, according to witnesses, the sky turned red for a few minutes and wailing noises were heard that no one could explain. A community elder, considered wise, said clearly, "They are marking us, not on our skin, on our souls." This kind of language matched what Teresa had written. "They will not come with violence, but with gentleness, but their hands will bear a mark, not from heaven." That phrase had been dismissed by many as exaggeration. Now, however, those who had witnessed those events knew they were not alone, that heaven had spoken, and that the earth had ignored the warning. With each story, Daniela felt the prophecy unfold like a map, a warning map, and at the same time, a spiritual roadmap. Because, along with each place of intervention, the Virgin had also left a call to intercession, to fasting, to personal consecration. She didn't announce danger to sow fear, but to awaken sleeping hearts, to light candles in the midst of a night that was growing denser. And the further she progressed in her research, the more she understood that it wasn't just about vaccines or experiments. It was about a profound plan of spiritual alteration, using the human body as a channel. That's why Our Lady spoke of the bridges of the soul. That's why she warned about substances that opened invisible doors. And that's why, amidst everything, she left a ray of hope. That ray would be revealed in the next message. One of the most painful, but also the most sacred, the message about children. Because, as Mary said in one of her saddest whispers, "If you manage to touch the most innocent, you will have touched the heart of my son." There is no deeper pain for a mother than to see her child suffer. And there is no warning harsher, more hurtful, more distressing than that which directly touches the innocent. That's why, when Teresa shared the fragment of the message where Our Lady spoke of children as the target of this hidden plan, no one wanted to hear it. Some ignored it out of fear, others rejected it out of disbelief, but all, deep down, felt a silent shudder, as if something sacred were about to be broken. Daniela reread that passage over and over again. It was written in blue ink, with shaky handwriting, as if it had been written through tears. "They will come for the little ones. They are the purity they wish to silence. Their pure blood is the barrier that still resists the darkness." That phrase kept her awake, and in her prayers she asked the Virgin for clarity. What exactly did it mean? What were they trying to do to the children? The answers came through testimonies. At a school in southern Chile, students began to experience sudden changes in behavior after a children's vaccination campaign. Teachers reported apathy, loss of interest in religious music, and emotional isolation. In Guatemala, a mother reported that her 8-year-old son, after receiving the vaccine, stopped speaking for a week. "He looks at me as if he doesn't recognize me," she said through tears. Daniela compiled these testimonies and began comparing them with the messages received by other visionaries. One of the prophecies delivered in Medjugorje mentioned that the spiritual enemy would seek to interrupt the music of the soul in the young. Another message from La Salette stated that a new substance will course through the veins of the innocent and will change their path without them knowing it. Although symbolic, those phrases now seemed to have a direct echo of what was happening. The Virgin, according to several visionaries, used strong but maternal words. "Beware of the hands that approach your children with sweet promises. Not everything that shines comes from heaven. If you allow them to touch its essence, you will allow its light to cool." That last phrase, the light, also began appearing in the dreams of several praying mothers in different countries. Some saw their children with a grey veil over their faces. Others dreamed of injections that extinguished small candles. In the village where Teresa had lived, news broke of a girl named Lucia who began drawing strange figures after her vaccination. They were dark, faceless shapes with broken wings. When her mother asked her what they meant, the girl responded with a chilling phrase, "They're the ones who came in when I fell asleep." Terrified, the mother decided not to send her daughter to school anymore. Shortly after, she was visited by two people claiming to be health officials. They offered her food and help if she would allow the second dose. She refused, and since then, no one has seen her in the village again. Daniela knew she had to share this, but she also knew the message had to be clear. It wasn't about spreading panic, but about opening eyes. The Virgin didn't speak with hatred or threats. She spoke with pain, with the love of a heavenly mother who sees her children being unknowingly led into danger. Her warning wasn't just medical, but spiritual. The children's souls were being attacked in an invisible, subtle, almost undetectable way, but real. Doctors who dared to speak out began to report unusual symptoms: emotional disconnection, a blank stare, and a rejection of spirituality. One even mentioned that when a religious image was placed in front of a recently vaccinated child, the child turned away in obvious rejection, something he had never done before. Another commented that many children slept excessively or suffered recurring nightmares with figures watching them. Daniela then remembered a part of the message she hadn't understood at the time. The Virgin said, "They will come for the garden, because they know that in it flourishes the pure love that can still save the world." The garden was the children, and if that garden was destroyed, darkness would have a clear path to advance. But not everything was dark. The Virgin also gave them a tool of defense, a special prayer to protect the little ones, a consecration that had to be performed every night with a lit candle and an open heart. This prayer was secretly shared among mothers in various countries, and those who recited it reported peace, bright dreams, and in some cases, inexplicable healings. Daniela decided to publish this prayer on a hidden blog, protected by friends who knew how to avoid censorship. Within days, she received hundreds of messages of gratitude. A mother in El Salvador said her son had stopped screaming at night. A grandmother in Argentina claimed her grandson had started speaking again after weeks of silence, and they all had one thing in common. They had stopped blindly trusting what the world offered them as truth. The warning about the children was clear. All is not lost if a mother's heart prays with faith. And in that phrase, Daniela found her mission. It was no longer just gathering information. It was forming a spiritual shield, awakening prayer, activating fasting, alerting families. Because the battle for the innocent was not only earthly, it was sacred. The next step would be even deeper, because if they were altering the children, what exactly were they introducing into their bodies? What was this unknown component the messages spoke of? What did the Virgin's expression, the subtle mark, really mean? That was the question Daniela was about to investigate, and it would lead her to one of the most disturbing discoveries of her life. What began as a murmur became a stifled scream. In the hallways of closed laboratories, in unrecorded calls, in encrypted forums where doctors, chemists, and technicians met in secret, a truth began to take shape that no one in power wanted spoken out loud. Some of those men and women had participated in the development of the formulas used in the 2025 vaccination campaigns, and although at first they thought they were working for the common good, something profound made them stop and speak. One of the first testimonies Daniela received was from a molecular biologist who had worked for a European firm. He declined to reveal his name, but he shared with her an internal document that mentioned the introduction of a neuro-spiritual receptor modulator. The term didn't exist in any medical textbook. It wasn't even part of standard scientific language. But the description was clear. It was a substance designed to alter brain processes linked to moral perception, empathy, and, in the words of the report, the human connection with metaphysical realities. Daniela was paralyzed. It was the first time a scientific source had confirmed what the Virgin Mary's messages had been saying for decades. that these vaccines contained something more, something that couldn't be seen with a common microscope, something that touched the soul. The Virgin had named it the subtle mark. It wasn't a chip, it wasn't a visible sign. It was an intervention that, once freely accepted, opened an inner door. In one of the most powerful messages delivered to a nun in Eastern Europe, Mary said, "The battle will not be for the flesh, but for the conscience. And those who voluntarily enter into darkness will no longer hear my voice." This phrase remained engraved in Daniela's heart as she read, horrified, the leaked reports. But it wasn't just that scientist who decided to speak out. A Filipino nurse who had been sent to remote communities to administer the vaccine also spoke out. She said that during prior training, they were forbidden from praying with patients, wearing visible crucifixes, or mentioning any kind of spiritual comfort. They told us this was science, not religion, but I knew something wasn't right. I've never seen such empty eyes after an injection. She was fired 2 weeks after questioning the program. Another testimony came from Africa, where a field doctor, a staunch Christian, resigned after seeing what he described as inexplicable transformations in previously healthy children, total apathy, loss of identity, rejection of their parents, and in some cases, uncontrollable laughter during sacred moments. He claimed that one night, after administering more than 100 doses, he dreamed of a figure wrapped in white who told him, "You have touched the temple, but you can still consecrate yourself." That testimony led him to seek refuge in a Benedictine community, where he wrote down everything he had seen. His document was shared with Daniela by a priest friend. In it, the doctor concluded with a devastating statement. "They used us as tools. We thought we were protecting them, but we were channels for something we don't understand." Daniela began compiling these testimonies, not to generate fear, but to open eyes. Every word of the repentant scientists coincided with heaven's warnings. The enemy came not with weapons, but with white coats. He didn't present himself with fire, but with kindness, with science, with progress. And yet the result was the same: empty souls, sleeping consciences. One of the most shocking cases was that of an Italian technician who leaked internal company recordings in which the possibility of inserting into formulas elements that interfere with the individual's emotional stability over the next 6 to 12 months was openly discussed. What was the objective? Control, obedience, and above all, spiritual separation. "If you lose the ability to pray, you will no longer need divine answers," said a voice on the recording. Daniela shared that audio in private circles, knowing that if she made it public, it would be immediately censored. Those who heard it reported feeling a pressure in their chest, as if their souls were shaking upon hearing the truth. It was as if each word confirmed what the Virgin had pleaded for so many years: protect the temple. Do not allow it to be desecrated with sweet lies. The scientists who repented knew they were putting their careers, their lives, and their families at risk. But something stronger moved them: their conscience, their soul, that which cannot be bought or erased. One of them said in an anonymous letter sent to Daniela, "I can't live with what I did. I just want the world to know. May heaven forgive, and may someone be saved." And then, amidst that chain of pain and revelations, a new question arose. What exactly was that component? What did it carry? Why did it have that spiritual effect? It was there that Daniela found the most cryptic message of all, the one that spoke of an invisible signature in the blood which will be recognized by the angels on Judgment Day. Did this substance leave a permanent spiritual imprint? Was this what Our Lady called a subtle mark? And if so, was there a way to undo it? That question would become the focus of the next chapter, when Daniela discovered that the Virgin not only warned, but also provided a powerful tool for discernment and protection, a revealed prayer designed for this time, for this deception, for this battle. It cannot be seen, it cannot be smelled, it cannot be detected in routine tests. And yet, It is there. It is real. It is at work. That was the first conclusion Daniela reached after reading the reports, listening to the testimonies, and reviewing the prophetic messages. The mystery of the unknown component was beginning to reveal its dark face, and the most chilling thing was not its physical effect, but its spiritual implication. Because this invisible element, according to the Virgin's message, not only entered the body, it entered the soul. The phrase subtle mark first appeared in Teresa's writings, accompanied by a disturbing image, a human silhouette covered in a dark mist that seemed to emanate from within. It doesn't impose itself by force, but enters with permission, she wrote. This initially puzzled Daniela. How could something so subtle be so invasive? But as the messages and testimonies accumulated, an idea began to take shape. This compound wasn't simply a chemical additive, but a spiritual key. One of the documents leaked by a former lab technician spoke of neuro-emotional resonance vectors, a term used to describe substances that could alter the perception of reality without directly modifying the nervous system. This explained why so many vaccinated people began to display a kind of inner coldness, a disconnection from the transcendent, an inability to be moved by the sacred. The Virgin had said it clearly. It is not what touches your flesh that separates you from heaven, but what puts your soul to sleep and makes you forget who you are. For Daniela, that phrase was a revelation. She began to understand that the subtle mark operated in a deeper dimension, where the material and the spiritual intersected, and that intersection was the human heart. Many thought of microchips, digital tattoos, visible codes. But the Virgin spoke of something that didn't need to be seen to leave a mark. It was a voluntary renunciation of divine protection, disguised as progress, camouflaged as medicine. And the most painful thing, this renunciation occurred without full awareness, without knowing it, without wanting it, like an invisible signature on a contract that no one read, but everyone accepted. One of the Medjugorje visionaries had mentioned this with prophetic words. A day will come when many will sign with their blood something they believe is necessary for life, unaware that they are sealing their soul with a shadow. That phrase took on new meaning for Daniela when she received the testimony of a French doctor who had converted to Christianity, who described the following. After participating in laboratory tests with children, I felt a dark presence in my house for weeks. Until I went to confession and prayed the rosary, I couldn't sleep peacefully. This led her to an even more urgent question. Can the subtle mark be undone? Is there a way to cleanse it, to reverse its effect, to break that invisible seal? The answer came in one of the most hopeful revelations she encountered. The Virgin had given a secret prayer, revealed only to those who asked for it with a surrendered heart. This prayer, known as the consecration of the soul to the Spirit of Truth, was recorded by a Carmelite nun in 1999. According to her account, Our Lady told her, "For every poison I have left an antidote, and for every wound of the soul I have given a medicine in the form of light." The prayer was to be performed for 9 days at the same time, during fasting or personal sacrifice, with a lit candle and an image of the Sacred Heart present. Daniela began sharing that prayer in close circles. The effects were immediate. People who had received the vaccine and felt a spiritual emptiness began to experience solace. Some recounted dreams about the Virgin Mary. Others said they had cried for the first time in months. A young man in Bolivia wrote, "I feel like something has broken inside, as if my soul has been given back to me." It was proof that there was still hope. However, Our Lady also warned that this consecration must be done with complete freedom and humility. It wasn't enough to repeat words. An interior act was required, a sincere surrender, a firm will to no longer subject the body to the world system. Whoever consecrates himself with faith will be marked by light, and no darkness will be able to touch him without heaven's permission. This concept of light began to appear frequently in the most recent messages, not as a metaphor, but as a tangible reality. Some witnesses reported seeing flashes of light during prayer. Others felt an unknown peace, as if enveloped in an invisible shield. According to Our Lady, a soul that consecrates itself becomes inaccessible to the enemy's strategies. Daniela understood then that the real battle wasn't against a vaccine or a laboratory. It was a battle for the soul, for inner choice, for free will. And that choice had to be made in the silence of the heart, far from the noise of the world, there, where the Virgin Mary continued to whisper, "My child, if you have already been marked, do not fear. I can wash you with tears of light." And so, in the midst of a world where many remained asleep, where campaigns advanced without resistance, and where the majority accepted without question, a small flame emerged. A group of people praying in secret, consecrating themselves, protecting their children, awakening. They were the seed of a new spiritual resistance. And Our Lady had already announced, "When all seems lost, the consecrated will shine, and from them renewal will be born." That renewal would be announced with visible signs, not only in the soul, but also in the body and in heaven. And for that reason, what came next would be even more shocking, the signs that would appear as confirmation of what was already happening. The time of confusion was not announced with a bang. It came gently, with elegant words, with good intentions. It came in the form of quick fixes, health campaigns, speeches of global unity. And yet, beneath that appearance of light, many began to walk down dark paths without even realizing it. That is why the Virgin, in her infinite love as a mother, provided a sacred tool for these times, a prayer that not only protects, but also opens the eyes of the soul, a prayer of discernment. Daniela had heard about it in certain circles, but had never found it in writing. They said it was a key to clarity revealed to true visionaries around the world, especially when the soul began to become confused between truth and falsehood. In the most recent messages, Our Lady warned, "A time will come when evil will wear the garments of goodness, and my children will not know who to listen to." That time was now. After months of research, prayer, and connecting with believers who had also been touched by the revelations, Daniela received the complete prayer from an unexpected source, an elderly religious woman from Portugal who had been visited by a missionary from Eastern Europe. He carried with him an old handwritten notebook with fragments of Marian messages, prayers, and visions. On one page, this invocation appeared, "Mother of Truth, guide my steps. Don't let me confuse the sweet with the holy, nor the kind with the just. If my soul has become clouded, wash my eyes with your light. Teach me to see with the heart, to feel with eternity. Take me where your words bloom, and keep me away from the paths where lies reign. Amen." Deal. The prayer was to be said every morning, before listening to any message from the world. Our Lady had said that upon awakening, the soul is most receptive, and it is at that moment that clarity can enter like a ray of sunlight into a closed house. Daniela prayed it for the first time with some hesitation, but when she finished, she felt a peace she hadn't experienced in months. It was as if an invisible veil had fallen. That same day, he began to see more clearly the manipulations disguised as help. He understood, without needing proof, which voices he should ignore, which programs he shouldn't follow, which discourses he shouldn't accept. And the most striking thing was that he also began to recognize, with an almost supernatural sensitivity, the truths that came from heaven. He no longer needed explanations. His heart knew. It was then that she decided to share prayer with others. Not in a mass, but privately in discreet communities, in authentic prayer groups. The reactions were immediate. Tears, confessions, awakenings. Many said they felt something they couldn't put into words. "It's like someone is calling me again," wrote a young woman from Ecuador. "It's like coming home." Our Lady had said that this prayer would be the beginning of an inner purification. It wasn't enough to flee from evil. It was necessary to love good with one's whole being. And for that, the soul had to be trained, purified, and illuminated. Discernment wasn't a gift reserved for a select few. It was an urgent need for all, especially now, when truth was mixed with lies in equal doses. One of the most powerful messages delivered in 2022 said, "Many will accept darkness, believing it to be charity. That is why I give you this prayer, so that you may remember that my Son is the truth, not convenience." These words were engraved in Daniela's heart, especially when she saw how even people of faith began to justify the unjustifiable. "It is for the common good," they said. "It is only a requirement," they repeated. But Our Lady was clear. What is not born of true love does not come from heaven. This is how small discernment groups were formed in different countries. They weren't large movements. They had no visible leaders or formal organization, but they were connected by prayer, by spiritual intuition, by the certainty that they were living in a prophetic time, and at the center of it all, that simple prayer that opened invisible paths. Daniela began receiving dreams, not every day, only at key moments. In one of them, she saw a valley covered in smoke with people walking aimlessly, but there was a hill illuminated by a single candle. Those who reached it could see again. And at the base of the candle, written in letters of light, was the prayer she had begun to share. Upon awakening, she understood, every soul that prays this prayer becomes a flame. That was the true power of discernment, becoming a light for others. It wasn't about judging, but about guiding, about being a bridge, about being a refuge. Because while many were marked by confusion, the consecrated, those who saw, became sentinels. And then signals began to arrive. First, lights in the sky. Then gentle tremors during moments of prayer. In some churches, where the discernment prayer was being recited, inexplicable sweet aromas began to appear. And in one instance, it brought Daniela, a 9-year-old girl, to tears after praying it. She said, "Mom, now I can hear Jesus." It was just the beginning, because the Virgin had promised that those who sincerely surrendered themselves would receive direct confirmation from heaven, not to exalt themselves, but to strengthen themselves, to continue, to resist, and to protect others, especially the most vulnerable. And this is where a new chapter in this prophetic story began. For if consecrated souls began to receive signs, how would they manifest themselves? What kind of signs would be visible to those who still doubted? Could heaven touch the body as it had touched the soul? The answer would come in the next message, when the Virgin Mary began to reveal what was about to happen, the signs in the body and in the sky that would confirm everything she had foretold. The Virgin Mary's warnings didn't just speak of the invisible. They also announced what would soon be visible, tangible, and irrefutable. In several messages over the decades, Mary had indicated that a time would come when the sky and the body would begin to manifest signs in direct response to human decisions. And that moment, as Daniela and many others already felt deep in their souls, had begun. The first signs were subtle, almost imperceptible to a distracted world. But awakened hearts, those who prayed with devotion, began to notice. In several consecrated communities, people reported feeling an inexplicable warmth in their chests during adoration. It wasn't a fever, it wasn't anxiety, it was a serene sensation, as if something were burning within with tenderness. In some cases, this burning was accompanied by a floral scent of no natural origin. "It is the heart marked by light," wrote a woman in Spain, who had consecrated her life after receiving the vaccine against her will. But the signs were not limited to the physical. In many parts of the world, lights began to be reported in the sky. These were not ordinary astronomical phenomena. They were sudden flashes, figures that appeared between the clouds at dusk, shapes of crosses, hearts, stars that flickered with an intensity never seen before. In Medellin, a group of young people claimed to have seen a fiery dove cross the sky while they were praying the rosary for the unconsecrated. The event was recorded and shared on social media, although many platforms quickly deleted it. Daniela was collecting these testimonies when she received an unexpected message. A woman from the Philippines, a mother of 3, recounted that while praying the discernment prayer in front of an image of the Sacred Heart, a tear of water flowed from the statue. "My son was with me. He saw it too. We're not crazy." That same week, 3 other similar cases were reported in different parts of the world. Some involved images of the Virgin Mary. Others involved antique crucifixes. Our Lady had said in Medjugorje, "When the world no longer hears my voice, then heaven will speak with fire, with light, and with tears." And that was what was beginning to happen, a merciful manifestation of a heaven that does not give up, that does not abandon, that seeks to save every last heart. The signs on their bodies were equally striking. People who had been vaccinated with the 2025 vaccine began experiencing repetitive dreams with biblical words, sacred places, and urgent calls to conversion. Some dreamed of a voice saying, "You can still come back." Others saw a kind of luminous mark emerging from their chest when they said the name of Jesus. Most striking was the case of a woman in Guatemala who, after several months without being able to pray or attend Mass, began to feel an intense burning sensation every time she heard sacred music. After confessing her participation in an experimental vaccination program, she was accompanied by a prayer group. That night, during a vigil, she fainted, and upon awakening said she heard the voice of the Virgin, "I have cleansed your soul. Take care of it now." From then on, her health improved, her eyes began to shine again, and she returned to communion with tears in her eyes. These demonstrations began to multiply, and although many media outlets insisted on denying them, the prayer communities knew something big was brewing. "Heaven is touching the earth," said an elderly priest in a rural Italian parish, "and we must stay awake so as not to mistake the thunder for a miracle." Daniela began gathering images, recordings, and handwritten letters. She felt she was being guided to document what would later become a spiritual chronicle of this battle. She knew it wouldn't be easy, that she would be attacked, ridiculed, perhaps persecuted, but she also knew, like so many others who had awakened, that she couldn't remain silent, because the Virgin Mary had already said, "I will cover those who proclaim my signs with my mantle, and their words will touch those who are still asleep." One of the most striking signs occurred in a small village in Poland. On Easter night, a cross of light appeared in the sky for more than 10 minutes. It wasn't a cloud, it wasn't a lantern. It was a perfect, vertical, serene, luminous form. The villagers spontaneously began to pray, on their knees in tears, and among them were people who had never believed in apparitions. "I knelt down without thinking. Something pushed me from within," said a young man who had previously declared himself an atheist. But not everyone would receive the signs with joy. For some, they would be a painful confirmation. Our Lady also warned that souls who repeatedly rejected her calls and mocked the signs could begin to experience a form of irreversible spiritual blindness. "It's not that they don't see, it's that they no longer want to see," read a 1994 message. And so, heaven acts with delicacy. The signs are given first to the humble, the little ones, the consecrated, not to exclude others, but so that they may be the ones to announce, to prepare, to protect. Because the signs are not the end, but rather the preparation for what is to come. And what is to come, according to the messages, will be a moment of great inner revelation. The Virgin calls it the warning, a moment when every soul will see its interior as God sees it. A spiritual experience that will mark the beginning of a definitive separation between light and darkness. But before that happens, the signs will continue to increase, and those who see them must prepare not only for the miracle, but also for the battle. Daniela knew this, and so she prepared in silence, with fasting, with a daily rosary, with adoration, with vigils, and above all, with the mission in her heart to protect the consecrated, guide those who are awakening, and comfort those who are still afraid. The next chapter will focus precisely on that sacred mission, the role that consecrated persons will have in the days to come, and what will happen at the time of the warning. From the first heavenly warnings, the Virgin Mary made it clear that not everyone would live this time with the same intensity. There would be those who would walk asleep, surrendered to the noise of the world, and others, the consecrated, who would be called to fulfill a silent, firm, and luminous mission. This was not about religious offices or ecclesiastical titles. The consecration Mary spoke of was interior, a surrender of the heart, a profound decision not to belong to the system but to heaven. Daniela understood this as she prayed before the Blessed Sacrament. She wasn't a theologian, she wasn't a religious woman, but something inside her burned like never before. She had crossed an invisible boundary where she could no longer remain silent, pretend, or live as if she didn't know what she knew. She was a consecrated woman of the soul, like many others who, in different corners of the world, were preparing for what would soon happen, the warning. According to the most consistent revelations, confirmed by various visionaries, the warning would be a universal supernatural event, a moment in which every human being would see their soul as God sees it. It would not be judgment but truth. It would not be punishment but penetrating light. And that light would reveal the inner reality of each person with such absolute clarity that no one could deny it or hide from it. The consecrated would play a crucial role before, during, and after that moment. Before, to warn and prepare. During, to spiritually support those who could not bear the weight of their own conscience. And after, to guide the rebirth of a wounded but purified humanity. Mary had said, "They will be pillars in the invisible temple. Their knees, bent on the earth, will hold up heaven." Therefore, those who had already awakened needed to strengthen their interior life, daily rosary, fasting on bread and water twice a week, frequent confession, Eucharistic adoration, reading of the Gospel, and above all, total surrender to the Immaculate Heart. This was their spiritual armor, their shield against the approaching storm. Daniela began to form a small group of consecrated people in her city. There weren't many of them. A nurse, a teacher, a mother, a young man who had previously been lost in addiction, all united by the same thirst for truth. They met once a week in silence before an image of the Virgin Mary, praying together and sharing what the Spirit inspired them. One of them had a dream in which the Virgin Mary told them, "When the time comes, don't talk too much, embrace." That phrase became their motto, because they knew that during the warning many would scream, cry, and collapse. Some would be unable to bear the sight of their sins. Others would feel shame or despair. But the consecrated ones would not be there to judge, but to comfort, to remind them that God's love is greater than any mistake, to take their hands and repeat, "Heaven still awaits you." The warning wouldn't come with fireworks or announcements. It would be sudden, like a silent flash of lightning, like a tremor in the soul. The messages warned that it would last only a few minutes, but its impact would be eternal. Souls would see not only their sins, but also the consequences of their actions on others. They would feel the pain caused. But also, and this was most important, they would experience, if they opened themselves, the Father's embrace. Consecrated persons should be ready to welcome many people. Therefore, Our Lady asked them for concrete preparation, holy water in the home, visible religious images, consecrated candles and sacramentals. "Your homes will be beacons," she said, "and those who run to them will not find condemnation, but refuge." Daniela began distributing small bottles of holy water with labels that read, "When you don't understand anything, drink and pray." She also printed consecration prayers and left them at stations, hospitals, and schools. She did it without signing anything, without fanfare. It was part of her mission. She knew time was short, that the warning was closer than many imagined. Some priests began to speak of the judgment of conscience in homilies. Others were still afraid. But Mary had already said, "Even among my own people, there will be those who will not believe until they see." And so, she never tired of calling, of forming hearts, of strengthening her little apostles hidden in the world. In one of her most recent messages, revealed at a Marian shrine in southern Europe, Our Lady said with gentleness and firmness, "When my children look at their souls and are distressed, I will bring them to those who have said yes to me with all their being. They will look at them with my eyes, and then the healing will begin." This was the great role of the consecrated, to be bridges, to be lamps, to be arms, not prophets of condemnation, but witnesses of hope, because the warning was not a punishment, but an opportunity, a final call, an act of mercy that would mark human history in a before and after. Daniela knew she wasn't alone. In many countries, other hearts were burning just as much. They prepared in silence, in secret. They prayed at dawn. They fasted for those who don't believe. They offered their sufferings, and all out of love, out of obedience, out of trust. Mary called them her warriors of light, but he also knew that, although the warning would be a blessing for many, for others it would represent a harsh confrontation, especially for those who, having received the subtle mark, would not want to break free, because on that day the light would not only reveal, it would also separate. And it was at that moment that the Virgin Mary would give her final warning, one that would not come in words, but in an inner whisper, because, although everything seemed already accomplished, one last act of mercy remained for those who accepted the vaccines and now, fearfully, asked themselves, "Is there hope for me?" Not all souls made an informed choice. Many were led by fear, by pressure, by necessity. Others simply trusted. They said yes, without knowing what to do. And now, amidst all that has been revealed, a question arises that burns in the hearts of millions. What if I've already received that vaccine? Am I lost? Is there hope for me? The Virgin Mary responded to that anguish, not with judgment, not with reproach, but with love. In a message delivered in Latin America, Mary said, "The soul that did not know what it was doing will be reached by my mercy if it cries out with humility." These words resonate like a balm in the midst of a world divided by decisions made without clarity, because the subtle mark, though silent and spiritual, has no absolute power over a repentant heart that cries out for light. Daniela had seen that cry up close. She had received letters, voicemails, whispers in confession, people crying, asking if God still heard them, if there was a way to reverse the invisible, if their children were still under heaven's protection. And it was for them that a profound act of reparation began to circulate, revealed by the Virgin through a Marian priest in Eastern Europe, an act that was to be lived with truth, dedication, and perseverance. This act had 3 steps. 1. Inner recognition, to admit before God, without excuses, that one accepted something without discernment, without prayer, without asking heaven, not as punishment, but as truth. He who recognizes himself as small becomes great before my Son, Our Lady said. 2. Consecration of body and soul, spiritually renounce any occult effects that this substance may have left. For this, the Virgin Mary offered a special prayer. "Mary, Immaculate Refuge of those who doubt, today I commit my body and soul to your heart. If I have been marked by error, weakness, or fear, erase with your light every shadow in me. I renounce every invisible pact and consecrate myself to the eternal truth of your Son. Amen." 3. Public act of reparation. It's not about humiliating oneself, but about bearing witness, about telling others that there is still a way out, that not all is lost, that heaven is still open. Mary asked those who have been restored to share their story, not out of pride, but out of hope. From those rescued, a new generation of apostles will be born, she revealed. Daniela helped organize the first reparation meetings. They were discreet. In homes, in rural chapels, sometimes in the shadow of a parish church, people who had already received the vaccine approached with tears in their eyes, asked to be heard, prayed together, and left with their eyes shining. Not because everything was resolved, but because they were no longer alone. They were no longer condemned to silence. And so the testimonies began to multiply. A man in Argentina recounted that after the act of consecration, he was able to confess sincerely for the first time in 20 years. A mother in Mexico dreamed of a gold cross emerging from her chest after a vigil of reparation. In Colombia, a sick young man was inexplicably healed after fasting for 7 days in reparation for his family. Mary had said, "Where there is sincere repentance, heaven descends." The souls who had been touched by the substance were now being touched by grace, not through their own merit, but through humility, because the greatest enemy of restoration isn't poison, it's pride. And that's why heaven still awaits so many who still don't dare to look within, who know that something has changed within them, but prefer to remain silent. For them, this message is urgent. Don't wait for the day of the warning. Cry out now. Mary is already interceding for you. The Virgin also asked that the consecrated not judge those who fell into the trap, that they embrace them, that they accompany them, that they guide them toward the light. The enemy's greatest victory would be to divide my children between the marked and the clean, but I came to unite, to heal, to restore what was touched. This was her final warning, but also her greatest promise, because in the days to come, many will suddenly wake up. The warning will be like a burning mirror to the soul, and those who have not prepared themselves will feel fear, shame, pain. But if at that moment, with a surrendered heart, they cry out to Mary, she will cover them with her mantle. She will take them by the hand, and she will present them before her Son, saying, "This one is mine. He entrusted him to me when he no longer believed there was any way out." Daniela understood that everything she had experienced, the research, the tears, the dreams, the rejections, was only preparation for that moment, for the day when thousands of souls would run toward those who still hold the flame. And so, in her last post, she wrote these words, "If you've already had the injection, don't be afraid. You are not discarded. You are loved. And if you choose God now, He can turn your wound into a source of blessing for others. Our Lady is seeking you. Today, not tomorrow. Respond to her." And that is the call with which we conclude this revelation. A call not to fear, to look within, to return to God with all our hearts, to pray for those who are still asleep, to consecrate ourselves, to embrace the time that remains. Because yes, judgment is coming, but before that, mercy is coming.